Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of HouseplanTEA Ranty. And today I want to talk about some words, phrases, terms that we use frequently in the houseplant community and houseplant world that really don't necessarily make a lot of sense and quite often cause a lot of confusion for plant parents. And these are things that have become just so ingrained in houseplant speech that I think a lot of people just don't stop to think if they still actually make sense or perhaps require a bit more clarification in order to make sense. So I've got my list of the particular phrases and terms that I want to talk about today. And I'm also going to let you know that even though I'm saying we should stop saying these, I am going to tell you what I think we should be saying instead to make things a little bit more easy and understandable for houseplant parents. And if the term bright indirect light sets you on edge because you're tired of hearing it, maybe you don't understand exactly what it means, we are going to be covering that topic last today because it's a big one and I have a lot to say about it. But the first thing I want to talk about, especially since today is officially the start of fall, and this is when people start being told to back off fertilization on their plants. And then when we get to winter, lots of people will tell you to just completely stop fertilizing your plants altogether. Why? Why is this a thing? Why is this the thing that people tell people? I certainly never tell people this. You guys know from watching my videos, if you've been here for a while and if you're new, welcome. I say fertilize your plants as long as they're growing. Doesn't matter what time of year it is. Now, some plants actually grow more in the winter than they do in the summer. So for example, my cyclamen plant here, it is a winter growing plant. It will start to put out even more growth right around now, but guess what? It supposedly will go dormant and die back, which it would if it's outside during the summer and spring, but in my house, we kept growing the whole time, all year long. I will officially have had this plant for 1 year in about 2 weeks, I think, and it has not stopped growing at all, so I haven't stopped fertilizing it. But you know, I was trying to come up with a good kind of analogy for you guys to understand when you perhaps should back off fertilizing or not. And I thought of like a hibernating bear. That's kind of the best analogy I could come up with. As long as that bear is awake and active and doing things, it needs to eat. It needs to eat to maintain energy, growth, all the good things. Now, when a bear goes into hibernation, it can sleep for months and not eat because it's doing nothing. It's not expelling any energy. Your plants are the same way. So as long as your plants are still growing, you need to keep feeding them. Now, if there is a plant that stops growing in the winter for some reason in your house, alocasia is a big one that pops into my brain, oxalis, so shamrocks have a tendency to die back in the winter. In those cases, yes, treat them like they're in hibernation. Like a hibernating bear, the bear's not going to eat. You don't need to fertilize those plants until they wake up and start growing again, because then they're going to need that fertilization to be able to do all the growing that they're going to do when they come back to life. So that is the best way I can think to explain it. But once again, in your house, your plants do not necessarily know what time of year it is. That's why the cyclamen never stopped growing for me. And so there's just no reason for you to stop fertilizing in the winter unless your plant actually does stop growing. So that is how I recommend you guys think about it. And once again, I do once per month if they're growing in the winter and if they're growing a little bit slower than they did in the summer. And then if they start to pick up that growth more rapidly in the spring and summer, then I increase my fertilization to once every 2 weeks. But I think that is the best way to think about it, and that we need to stop saying not to fertilize in the fall and winter months and change it to saying fertilize as long as your plant is still growing. Now, similarly to this whole don't fertilize in the fall and winter, a lot of people in the houseplant community, houseplant world will tell you to water less in the fall and winter. That is ridiculous, and I will explain why. But I actually have 3 watering topics that I want to cover today, and I want to start with a different one first because it will help you to understand why the whole backing off watering in fall and winter isn't the most accurate statement. So the first watering thing I want to talk about that drives me nuts is when people say, wait until the top inch or 2 inches of your soil is dry and then water the plant. Really? Does that really make sense? It does not make sense. And that is why I do not tell you guys to water your plants when X inches of soil get dry. Because if you have a pot that is this size and you have the same pot that is smaller, an inch down in this pot versus an inch down in this pot is drastically different. You're gonna have way more wet soil still in this pot when the top inch gets dry than you do in this pot. So that really doesn't make sense. And that is why I don't tell you guys that. Instead of that, what I think we should do, which is what I do, is to say how far down in terms of percentage of pot size you need to let that soil get dry. So for example, if this was an alocasia planted in here, I would be telling you guys, wait till it gets about halfway dry, till the top half portion of this pot is dry. Same thing here, because we're looking at it from a ratio standpoint. That way you're doing apples to apples. The other way is not apples to apples at all. Now, I would like to point out one exception to this rule. There are plants that I have told you guys about that just are moisture loving plants, and as I always put it, they want all the water in the world. And I have told you guys in the past, as soon as the top layer of soil looks dry to my eye is when I will water those plants. That still holds true for those plants because those plants do not like to dry out at all. And the indication to me that they're starting to dry out is when the top layer looks dry. So as soon as I see that, doesn't matter how big the pot size is, because those plants don't want to dry out at all. That is the only exception to that rule. Otherwise, once again, I think we need to stop saying top inches of soil and talk about the percentage of the pot. So how does this tie back into the whole telling people to back off their watering in the fall and winter? Well, the problem with this one is people are telling people to purposefully back off their watering in fall and winter when the reality of the situation is you might water less, but it's something that happens coincidentally. The rule of thumb, you guys, is you gotta water your plants when your plants need water. And how soon your plants need water may change throughout the year. It changes with how much light's coming through your windows at each point in the year, how many hours of daylight are coming through your window in each point in the year. So yes, you may find that you are actually watering a lot of your plants less in the fall and winter, but you're not purposefully doing it. You're still watering your plants when they need water. You're waiting till they need water. And if that means that you're watering them less, then yeah, you're watering them less, but it's not like a conscious decision, oh, it's fall, it's winter, I need to not water my plants as often. No, you're still operating the same as you would any other time of the year. You're checking your plants. If they need water, you water them. If they don't need water, you don't water them. And that's it. It's really simple. All year round, that is how you operate. So we need to stop telling people to back off your watering in fall and winter. It just doesn't make sense. Now, this next watering topic might be a little bit controversial, but I'm definitely curious to know what you guys think about this, so make sure and comment down below and give me your thoughts on it as well. But I want to talk about the concept of overwatering because I think that concept confuses a lot of people, and a lot of people out there on YouTube, just bloggers on the internet, don't really do a good job of explaining what overwatering is, and honestly, you guys, if overwatering is actually a thing. So number one, if you are new to plants and you are watching this video, a lot of people who are new to plants here are overwatering. They think that means that you are giving your plant too much water at once. Like, today I need to water this plant, I put a gallon in there and that was too much, I should have done like a cup. That is not how it works. You could pour as much water down your plant today in one sitting as you want. As long as you have drainage holes, it is going to drain out and you are going to be fine. What people really mean in current houseplant speech when they say overwatering is that you didn't wait long enough from the last time you watered your plant before you watered it again. And now you've overwatered it, and as we all know, we tell you that overwatering leads to root rot and then your plant can die. I am guilty of saying that because that is, once again, what's been ingrained into the houseplant world, houseplant community of how we talk about things. But the fact is, overwatering is not what causes root rot. Root rot is actually a symptom of something completely different. And so I think we need to change up how we talk about overwatering. And a lot of people out there actually think overwatering isn't a thing at all, period. And if you stop to think about it, like plants in the wild, I mean, rain happens when rain happens, and you don't hear about all these plants in the wild getting root rot and dying from being overwatered. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the ground is much larger than a pot, right? And so that water has more area to spread out into and disperse through in the wild. Now, also, roots can go further out or further down to get away from excess moisture if they need to. But the key thing about root rot in particular is that it is actually caused by a lack of oxygen to the roots. Now, in the wild, there are a lot of other things living in the soil and burrowing around, earthworms, grubs, things like that, that are helping to create air pockets in that soil around those roots. So that's also a reason that you don't hear about plants dying from rot from being overwatered in the wild. So I hope you're starting to pick up on what I'm talking about here. what happens that causes root rot that people will say is from overwatering actually really doesn't have much to do with watering at all. It has to do with your pot and whether or not it has drainage holes. Always want those drainage holes so that it's not sitting in water. It has a lot to do with your actual substrate that you're putting the plant in, and does it have extra drainage? Is it well draining enough to not soak those roots and to also not become compacted down around those roots? Because what root rot actually is caused by is suffocating the roots, not letting those roots have enough oxygen, and that kills the roots. The roots then start to rot because they're dead and they're not actually taking up any water. That is what happens. So theoretically, and I'm saying theoretically because I don't want anybody to think this and then have a plant get root rot. You know, I don't know your exact circumstances, but theoretically, if you had a plant in the right size pot, a pot with good drainage holes, you have it in the right type of soil that's well draining, you're getting it enough light because it needs to be able to have enough light to use up the moisture in the soil as quickly as it can. If you are doing all of those things, theoretically, you should not be able to, quote, overwater your plant. You could give that plant water probably every single day and it will drain out as much as it doesn't need. We talked about guttation in a recent video. It can also take that moisture and push it out through the leaves. Guttation will not kill your plant. It's a natural process. Plants in the wild do that as well to help get rid of excess moisture. And so under those perfect circumstances, it really honestly shouldn't be possible to overwater your plant. Now, the problem is it's hard to get those circumstances just right. So that's why we always tell you to make sure you're waiting long enough in between watering your plants. But let's just get something straight. Overwatering does not cause root rot. Root rot is caused by suffocating roots. So you always want to make sure that there is enough aeration in your soil, that your roots are getting enough oxygen, because that is how we prevent root rot. So the next topic I want to talk about, and it was one of you guys, Marissa up in Canada. Thank you, Marissa. You're always triggering ideas for videos in my head. You're like a little muse. But she triggered an idea off of a comment she made on a recent video where she was talking about when people say not to put your plants in direct drafts from like an AC vent or a heat vent. And she mentioned there's wind in the wild, so why can't we put them in direct drafts? That's when it dawned on me that nobody really thoroughly explains why we say not to put them in direct drafts, and also nobody really talks about the difference between a direct draft and airflow, because airflow is key for plants. It really is, especially if you live in a very humid climate. You need airflow so that you don't get like fungal and bacterial problems going on the leaves of your plants. So let's clarify this. Direct draft. When we're talking about a direct draft, we're really talking about if you have like central AC, central heat in your home, and there is an air vent that is blowing that air that is being artificially cooled or artificially heated directly onto your plant. That is not good for your plant for several reasons. One, it's decreasing or increasing the temperature directly around that plant and the direct temperature of that plant in a way that might be too much for it, and it might cause it harm. Now, the other problem is if you do struggle with humidity in your home, that air blowing on that plant is really messing with the humidity around that plant. It's basically dissipating the humidity around that plant. So now that plant's getting even less humidity than it would if it wasn't in a direct draft in your home. So that is why we say don't put plants in direct drafts. Now, the same thing goes for if you like open a window and it's like where I live in the summer where it's like, you know, triple digit Fahrenheit heat, and I open a window and the wind is blowing hot air on to my plant. That is pretty much the same thing as putting my plant directly under one of my vents with the heat on. So you have to be careful about that as well. But airflow is great for your plants. So for example, if you have a ceiling fan, turning on your ceiling fan, it's going to move air around your room. It's going to blow some of that air around onto your plants. And that is something that is okay for your plants. That is kind of what we think of as like, you know, a nice breeze out in the wild for plants. So airflow is good. It is just those direct drafts that are being super chilled or super heated that are really not great for your plants. But let's move on to the big topic that I kind of teased at the beginning of this video, and that has to do with lighting and how we talk about lighting. And you guys know I try not to talk about it that way. I don't like saying like bright indirect light, medium indirect light. I say it because some people understand in their homes where those places are, but I've told you in plenty of videos that so many things affect the lighting in your home. For example, my new windows are awesome. Those windows are just such higher grade and are blocking so much more of the harmful rays that I can almost put any plant in those windows now. Now, before I replaced them, there was no way. My plants definitely would have gotten burned with the builder grade windows there with no extra like sunscreen, basically, protection going on them. So everybody's circumstances are different. So I really think we need to stop saying this whole like bright indirect light or medium indirect light or low light, and I'll get a little more into the low light one here in a second. Ideally, what you always want to be doing is getting your plants into the brightest light that they can tolerate. That is what every plant wants. It wants as much light as it can get and still be happy. So that's why I always say in videos, especially care guides, after I tell you it likes bright indirect light, I always say, always just acclimate your plants to the brighter spots in your house. Pull them back if you see signs that they're not happy, such as leaf burn or paling of the leaves. Those are your two key signs that the plants are getting too much light. And once you find that sweet spot, that's where you're going to leave them. So that needs to be what we're always striving for. Getting all of our plants, no matter what genus of plant they are, into the brightest light that they can tolerate, because that's what they're going to want. Now, from a low lighting standpoint, because I know some of you are probably now thinking, well, are you trying to tell me I can never put a plant in a north-facing window? No, I'm not telling you that. And that's why when I say plants that are tolerant of lower light, those are the plants that I'm talking about where you could put them directly in a north-facing window and they will be fine. Now, other plants, such as like say alocasias, I'm not putting my alocasias directly in a north-facing window because they will not be happy and they will decline fast because they want a lot of light. But this is how we need to talk about plants. Get them in the brightest light possible. If they're low light tolerant, then also still try to get them into the brightest spot in your low light rooms. And if you do find you need to use a grow light, try using a grow light. But this is more helpful, I hope, to you guys, let me know down below if you disagree, than to just say, find a medium bright indirect light space in your house, because everybody's homes are different. And another thing that does not get talked about enough, and I am guilty of this for sure, is how many hours of daylight your plants are getting. That changes drastically throughout the year, and it changes drastically depending on where you live. So let's just give the super crazy example of Alaska. So there are times of the year in Alaska where it's daylight 24 hours a day. I mean, that plant's never getting a break from the light during those days. And then there's days where it's dark for that long as well. So that is very different than my situation here. And so you really want to be paying attention to how many hours of daylight your plants are getting, because those plants that really want a lot of light, we're saying they need probably, some people will say 4 to 8 hours of light a day. I think 4 is kind of pushing it. I would say 6 to 8 hours a day of light. Bright, sometimes direct light. Think like your cacti and succulents for sure fall into that category. Now, some other plants that are more bottom dwelling out in their natural environment, such as your calatheas, can get away with some fewer hours as long as you still have them in a decent level of light. So mine that are in my east facing window in my bathroom, certain times of the year, they don't get as many hours of daylight there, but they're getting enough of bright light during those hours that they're getting it that they do fine. But these are just a few of the key houseplant phrases and terms that are used quite a lot out there that I really think we need to stop saying and start saying it differently and explaining it a little bit differently to make things easier for you guys out there, and especially for new houseplant parents. So I hope you guys have found this video interesting and useful today. If so, please be sure to click that like and/or subscribe button down below, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next time. Aloha!